welcome to this week's episode of Not DnD, brought to you by EN World. We're back here this week. As always, I'm the host, Jessica, and this week with me, I have a trio of investigators here to talk about Eureka, which is an investigative urban fantasy TTRPG, and I told them I would mess up the word investigative before we even started. But thanks for joining us, folks. Do you want to go around and introduce yourself and what you did in the project? Should we start with you, Ash?
Sure. Yeah, my name is Ash. I'm actually a pretty late arrival to the team. I'm the editor at Anim, and I started in January. I joined Anim's TTRPG book club server. We'll talk about that more later, I think. Got involved in the community. I think at some point Addison asked me to help him look over the 8th chapter, which is a part on like the supernatural elements of Eureka. We realized we had a really good workflow and that the book badly needed editing. And so we just kept working on it, and that's how I joined the team.
Beautiful. I love that. Blue, how about you?
So I'm a freelance illustrator. I've made some art for Eureka already. You're showing it right now. It's some promo art that I made for the Kickstarter. I've joined Eureka like pretty early, so we could work out the graphic style we wanted to go with, and I'll be making half of the art in the rulebook. I'm half of the illustrator team.
Gorgeous. And we'll talk a bit more about the art and inspirations when we get to chatting about the game. And last but by no means least, of course, Addison, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Addison. I am the lead writer and mostly team lead for the project. I've written and designed the vast majority of the rulebook rules and stuff like that. The vast majority of the rulebook rules and stuff like that. And I in our we use a Discord server. I kind of point people to what task they need to do so we can get this done more efficiently. So kind of director.
Mm-hmm. So you just herd all the cats to make sure it comes together as a project. Yes,
and I've been on Eureka since about was it late 2020 or was it 20? Oh, it was late 2021, I think.
Oh wow.
And when Brandon, one of our team members who's not here, was like, hey, do you want to help me playtest my new TTRPG? And I was like, sure. And then I was like, Brandon, this doesn't have a combat system, even though 100% this is going to result in combat. Would you like me to write one for you? And then he said, yes. And then I was a rules writer on the game. And we 2 years later, we formed an official LLC.
Fabulous. You kind of leaned into my next question, which I ask folks, which is, your background and history with RPGs. So obviously that's how you came to set up the company and work on this project. But Addison, do you remember any of your early tabletop RPG experiences? Do you remember your first game you played?
First game I played was Dungeons & Dragons 3.5 edition.
Classic.
And it was actually after Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition had already come out.
Oh, wow, okay.
But the people that invited me to play were more familiar with, well, of course, it was also long after Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition had come out, but no one plays that. So they invited me to play Dungeons & Dragons 3.5e, and it was, I don't want to say a disaster because we had fun. We had a lot of fun, enough fun that I wanted to keep playing tabletop RPGs.
Mm-hmm.
Although it's it was the kind of play that I would kind of I don't know, I guess kind of cringe at now, to use the first word that can come to mind, because most of us hadn't read the rule book.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a great time. It wasn't exactly, we weren't exactly playing Dungeons & Dragons 3.5e.
Okay.
Because we were winging a lot of rules.
Fair enough. So it makes sense as to why you've now picked up and started writing your own rules.
Right.
But Blue, how about you? What's your background with tabletop role-playing games?
I actually started playing when I met Addison. I was interested in playing for a long time before that, but he introduced me to it. I didn't really know anyone in my real life who was interested in TTRPGs, so that was really nice. My first TTRPG was D&D 5e, which scared me away
Oh,
from
really?
TTRPGs for a while because I thought it was a bit too complicated. But I got into it again more recently, and it's been really nice to explore more indie, smaller systems.
With Morkborg, right?
Yeah, Morkborg is what really got me back into it.
Cool, like that. And Ash as well. What about you? What do you remember the first RPG you played, and what's your sort of history with role-playing games?
RPGs and RPG rules have been a part of my life basically as long as I can remember. I mean, I grew up playing, Fallout, Baldur's Gate, Icewind Dale, from the age of like 5 or 6, not really knowing how they worked. But those are based on like GURPS and D&D and stuff like that. As far as at the table, I started in my freshman year of high school about 15 years ago now with D&D 4th edition, actually, but I didn't really know how it worked. I kind of was trying to run it like D&D 3.5. Since that time, have played a lot of games. I think I have around 20, 25 under my belt at this point. And particularly have played a lot of Burning Wheel, which I might talk about later.
Nice. We'll talk about that. And I imagine all of that, playing different TTRPGs and trying out different stuff has kind of fed into creating Eureka, obviously. So let's talk about what we came here to talk about. So I'd love to start with an overview of what the game is and how it works. So who wants to give us the elevator pitch for that?
Ash, I think you're better at elevator pitches than I am.
Okay, sure. So Eureka is an investigative game. It's focused on urban fantasy, as the title implies. Really, the I guess goal of the game is to emulate mysteries in any context, from any modern context, from supernatural adventures all the way down to something as mundane as like Murder, She Wrote, or even a Scooby-Doo mystery. The characters are very mundane, very grounded, as opposed to many other RPGs where they are usually larger than life. There are exceptions to that, but by and large, even the supernatural characters are very grounded, very human. So I would say in the elevator pitch, it's a game which is focused on the construction and solving of mysteries in a satisfying way, while also focusing on the human element of the characters involved and how solving the mystery affects them.
Beautiful. We love that. I love an investigation game because it's always really good fun, running around trying to solve kind of what's going on. But Addison, could you talk a little bit more about the setting and the tone of the game? Because, Ash mentioned it's very grounded and that sort of vibe, but could you expand on that a little bit?
All right. Yes, it is. It is very grounded. It does have the urban fantasy, subtitle, but like Ash said, even the vampires are very grounded. I'm going to use a relatively normal people, who you can see on the screen there. I feel like that's a very humanizing situation that you just threw up on screen. It is something that only a vampire could do, but it is not vampire as the ultimate butt kicker, who is afraid of absolutely nothing and never has to act in a compromising situation. It's very grounded. It is meant to be like noir / neo-noir, a bit gritty, a bit a bit seedy, maybe.
Mhm.
But of course, you could use the same rules for a Scooby-Doo mystery. We wanted, like Ash said, we wanted to make a game to run to be kind of a one-stop shop for your investigative gameplay, whether that be something like dark and depressing, like a dark, depressing noir mystery, or something more like the X-Files or Scooby-Doo. And then I also just really like supernatural folkloric creatures. And so there's also that.
Beautiful. So fair to say it has an adventure. There is like a tone and a vibe, but it's very much a toolkit for this style of play as well. Would that be fair? Yeah.
Amazing. Yes. And the something that a word that Ash uses a lot is verisimilitude.
Oh, a fancy word.
Yes. It's basically a synonym for realism, but the word realism kind of has too many connotations, whether those be good or bad connotations. But verisimilitude is, the feeling of being real. And Eureka is really going for verisimilitude. It takes place in quote unquote the real world, even if there's a vampire in the party or a vampire that acts as the antagonist. It's taking place in the real world. Yeah. Who would this vampire be if this was a vampire that existed in our world rather than like a fantasy world? This vampire has a job.
Amazing. And Blue, talking about all these kind of themes and the general idea behind the game, how did you bring this out in the kind of the art style and the visual design of the game?
I wanted to focus both on the horror and more human side. Really bring out like these two elements, which I think are a big strength of Eureka. Like it's mundane horror. It's things that happen in like your alleyway or your house. So for me, big inspirations were like CCTV or found footage stuff.
Oh, cool.
A bit like the Blair Witch. And painted posters. I love painted posters, like Carpenter's The Thing poster. It's something that really has a vibe to it where you can instantly recognize it. So that's really what I tried to go for.
Gorgeous. And as well as these more, sorry for the podcast listeners because they can't see that, but we've got links to the Kickstarter page where you can see what we're referencing. But there is kind of more detailed artworks, but there's also these kind of graphic icons and things as well juxtaposed throughout it. What's the role of these kind of cool icons and things we've got on the screen? More kind of block graphic, stark kind of style.
I'll take that because Brandon is not here.
Okay.
So one of our other team members, we have 5 team members, myself, Ash, Blue, Brandon, and C. And C is another one who's not here. And so we call these guys Snoops. Because they're like little detective guys. It is a little art style that Brandon and I came up with to be this was before we knew if we were going to have any budget whatsoever to hire like top-notch artists like Blue and C, who are like our main team illustrators. Although Brandon is doing a whole lot of Snoops and doing them very well. So we should probably also consider him a team artist. But the Snoops were an idea we had to create an art style that is something that conveys a lot of information while being very simple and easy to read and like a little cute, but not like cutesy. As you can see, it can involve violent themes as it's on the screen. So we went with this minimalist style, like so Brandon does not have to draw like too much in the way of like faces or anatomy. He can just focus on like movement and the clear silhouette of a little detective guy.
Mm-hmm.
And if you've played the Fallout video games, our plan, like from the very beginning, was to create something like a Vault Boy.
Right, got it. Yeah.
Like a figure that can be drawn in many situations quickly and be used. So many of these are used for illustrating traits, like as an icon that shows like something about the trait. And traits are something like characters are made up of traits and skills.
Yeah.
So that's where these guys came from.
Amazing. Well, thinking about other inspirations, so you've mentioned Fallout in a way there that were kind of an inspiration for the game. What other inspirations did you have? And that could be media or other tabletop RPGs.
I know a huge one is Kolchak the Night Stalker.
Yes. The show no one's ever heard of. So Kolchak the Night Stalker is like a mid to late 70s, I think. It might be early 70s. Okay. Television Monster of the Week serial. And it is the direct inspiration for the X-Files. If you've watched the X-Files, it is very similar. The biggest difference is that there's no overarching plot. It is just like isolated episodes. And the protagonist is a reporter rather than an FBI agent. Okay.
Is there also someone constantly missing the thing that's happening? Like an X-Files?
No, it's
no, they actually notice it.
No, they actually notice it. It's he's just a really kind of nosy reporter that ends up getting himself involved in dangerous supernatural mysteries, in the quest for the scoop, and then ends up pretty often being like the only one in town that knows that if he doesn't stop it, or if he doesn't perform the ritual or find the weakness to the monster, the whole hospital is gonna be destroyed, or it's gonna kill more people every day, and then he has to stop it, and no one will ever believe him. And like his film gets destroyed in the struggle, or the dead body turns to dust and blows away. Okay. And now there's no proof that there was ever a vampire or an ancient god under the hospital or anything like that. And it's just a very fun show. Not exactly horror, but I think it was kind of supposed to be horror. It's not so scary, but it's not going to scare you like a modern horror movie would. It does have some pretty interesting and pretty creepy concepts.
Sure.
And it was a major inspiration for Eureka. In that, yeah.
No, I was going to say, so is that's the sort of episodic adventures that we're going to be having if we were players sitting down to play the game? That's the sort of structure. Perfect.
We even have like an internal structure that's called Kolchakian. That is like, here's the structure of a Kolchak the Night Stalker episode, and here's how it is translated to an adventure.
I wanted to comment briefly on that, just to say that where it takes inspiration is in the fact that the main character is doesn't have institutional power and has to go breaking in and running up against structural power in order to solve the mystery. And you brought up the idea of like a skeptic. Really, the skeptic is the Scully is kind of played by the police and the investigators.
Right.
The like official channels, which is why they are an obstacle in Eureka. Actually, Eureka doesn't want you to play characters who are cops or FBI agents.
So you don't want to have that power and that, that much reach and things like that. So it's got to be more scrappy and desperate.
Right.
Amazing. That sounds perfect. Yeah, one of the things I find that we talk about a bit on Not DnD is because D&D is such a a big game in the tabletop space. Some of you might have heard of it. Trying to sometimes convince players to play different games can be a bit of a challenge. And often the burden is really on the person running the game to get the players to kind of come on board. And that can be a lot of work and labor because sometimes people fear, oh, I'm worried about learning a new system. One thing I noticed about Eureka is that you've made a lot of efforts to try and make it as easy as you can for the GM. Ash, could you talk a little bit about the ways you've tried to do this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that Eureka has a lot of tools in the toolbox. I do want to address up front, it's a big book.
Mm-hmm.
It's I think in the pre-edited version, it's like 500 pages.
Oh wow,
something like that.
That's
so it's quite a tome. It is going to be cut down in editing. I know when we edited the first chapter, we cut like 25% down. But we actually think that a bigger book is easier to use in a lot of ways. A lot of what is in the actual rule book is cases that aren't going to come up in every game, is tools that can be used. It's a big toolbox. The core rules really fit on, I mean, maybe 30 of those pages. The core rules for investigation for what the investigators are going to be doing the vast majority of the time, that's really a pretty small portion of the book. A lot of it is a toolkit. It's providing scaffolding, because the less information you have, the less structure you have, the more difficult it can be for particularly new players and new GMs to grapple onto that and find something like, I have this situation coming up in game. How do I handle it? We also, in addition to that, we try and make it clear that the game is very player driven and very investigator driven. So the characters are taking initiative. Having run a game of Eureka recently, I can say that it was really nice to be able to sit back and let the characters take the scene and just run with it. Also, we write and promote the use of adventure modules, pre-written adventure modules, because planning a mystery and writing a mystery are very difficult. So we want to provide that structure so that someone who's interested in the game can just grab a module, grab the book, and get right down to business without having to be a writer, be a director, be every bit part on stage, all at the same time. Yeah.
Nice. And one thing I noticed as well is one thing about running, I haven't run any mystery or investigation games, because one of the things I'm worried about is, because I've had it happen to me as a player in a game where you've lost the thread. You're not picking up on the clues. You know there's a mystery and there's puzzles here, and you're just not getting where you're meant to be going. So Addison, I don't know if you can talk about how the rules try and overcome that potential problem.
Yes, I can. There are two major. So that exact problem is something that the Eureka, the RPG, is very pointedly trying to solve and prevent, because it's a very big hurdle in a mystery game. So the first thing that Eureka does is it says up front that information is not going to be gated behind random rolls. So if in Dungeons and Dragons, there's the perception stat, and you roll your character's perception stat skill, and if that's a failure, then rules as written, they're probably not going to see something pretty important. And that's very bad for mystery solving. I think it's bad for just about any game, but it's even worse for mystery solving. So the rule is in Eureka is when characters walk into a room, the game master will describe the full room. Everything they can see is in that description. If there's the murder weapon sitting in the middle of the floor, the game master says the party sees the murder weapon sitting in the middle of the floor. If there's a suspicious lump under the rug, narrator's going to say, a narrator is what we call our game master, because every game has a different word for it. Game master's going to say, the party sees a suspicious lump in the floor, if a or on the under the rug, and also pretty importantly, if the murder weapon is underneath the couch, the game master will say there's a couch, but will not say the murder weapon is under the couch. The player will have to say, Detective Bradley is going to walk over to the couch and bend down and look underneath the couch. What does he see? And the game master will say, he sees a bloody knife hidden underneath the couch. No roll is required for that. The second thing, okay, so you don't need to make skill rolls for your characters to see obvious information.
Cool, great.
The second thing, but there are quite a lot of skills. I think there's 20 core skills, and then there's a bunch more quote unquote write-in skills that we probably don't have time to get into. But 20 or 21 core skills, and these are like, firearms, paperwork, nature, medicine, driving, athletics, and stuff like that. Just a bunch off the top of my head. These skills are used in investigation. There is no investigation skill. All skills are investigation skills. So what? Let's see. Let's see that Detective Bradley, as I made up, finds not a knife underneath the couch, but some spent bullet casings underneath the couch. Obviously, he could pick them up and read the back of them to see exactly what caliber they are. Anyone could do that without needing a skill check. But then the player could be like, I'm going to roll Detective Bradley's firearms skill, which is it's also a skill that governs how good he is at shooting things. But it also determines his knowledge of firearms. So if it's a 9mm bullet, roll the dice, get a success, and the game master will say, Detective Bradley knows this is a 9mm bullet. Some very common 9mm handguns are Glock, Beretta, various things like that. And that is information. So when you're rolling skills for investigation, you are rolling to find out what information your character can glean from the clues that they find. Right. Okay. And that can even be done to rule out. So even if it's obvious that the body was shot with a gunshot, rolling the firearm skill on that could confirm, yes, this was definitely a gunshot wound, which is also helpful even if it's obvious information. And you'd want to do that anyway because of the third thing, which is investigation points. So investigation points is a mechanic system that I call it a rubber band system, and it'll probably become pretty obvious why. So whenever characters make investigation checks, which is, again, as I said, that's a check to investigate using any skill modifier that they have, whatever most relevant one is, they will gain investigation points. Eureka has 3 degrees of success: full success, partial success, and failure. And a full success will get them pretty much all the information they can get from that skill on that item. And it will give them 1 investigation point. A partial success will give them some of the information and give them 2 investigation points. A failure will give them no information, but give them 3 investigation points. These are written down, recorded on the sheet, in a little checkbox bar. And when an investigator gets 15 of these, they roll over. So if you end up getting 17, then it rolls over, and then now the character has 2. But every time that reaches 15, they get a Eureka. which is a storable, like stackable resource or ability or whatever you want to call it, or a Eureka point, which can be used for a wide variety of different things. But the thing it gets its namesake from, and this is also what the actual RPG is named after, is the ability to use it for a Eureka moment. So anytime an investigator is going to fail an investigative skill check, you write that down on their character sheet. There's a section on the character sheet for writing that down. So, write 9mm bullets under couch, failed skill check, failed firearm skill check. And then you say, Game Master, I want to spend Detective Bradley's Eureka point on the failed skill check, the failed firearm skill check on the bullets that were under that couch. This could be like 5 sessions later. This could be 10 seconds later, as long as the skill check has been previously failed. And that is Detective Bradley having a Eureka moment where he will suddenly realize, wait, some explanation. It must have been a Glock because, and this whatever connection, or it must have been a ceramic gun because that's the only way that he could have gotten it to the metal detector. And retroactively, it unfails that skill check, meaning that if the investigators are stuck on something, as long as they keep investigating and racking up those points, they can spend them to unstuck themselves in the mystery. And that is that is the third thing that prevents getting stuck.
Great, I love that. So there's things baked into the mechanics to help the GM to make sure that they can kind of make sure that nothing's kept behind meaningless roles and things like that. And there's also mechanics for the players to feel like they have some way to call back information if they miss something. So that's really cool to know that this game doesn't leave you sat there going, I know we've got the clues and pieces here, but I'm just not seeing it, because that's not as fun an investigation game, because we want to find the things and do the things.
Right, and you still won't get as many investigation points as there are investigation roles. So it's not just an easy game for babies that always gives you the answer.
Oh, sure. There's like tone and pacing for it.
Right.
But so we talked a lot about the GM running the game, but from the player's perspective, if someone's listening to this interested in being a player, what do the characters sort of look like? Ash, I don't know if you want to talk us through that.
Sure. So as we mentioned, the characters are a lot more mundane. They find themselves in situations way over their head. They're kind of often flying by the seat of their pants, even if they are themselves a supernatural creature. There are like an option for playing vampires or anything like that. But even in those cases, they're getting involved because, a friend of theirs has asked them to look into a murder, or they're a reporter who's looking for a story. They are getting wrapped up into the mystery because they have some personal investment in it, not because they are directed by official channels. And this means that they don't have access to resources that a police officer or an FBI agent might have. They are scrappy. It's easy for them to get scared. But what I think the underlying theme that probably underlies... Oh, I'm so sorry. Just a moment. The underlying theme that... Sorry, I lost my train of thought. The underlying theme that kind of undergirds any Eureka character is their tenacity and their ability to keep going despite to keep looking into this mystery, despite the fact that they aren't officially sanctioned, despite the fact that if you see composure on the sheet there, that's kind of a measure of how well a character is keeping it together. Definitely represents the human element. Despite the fact that they are like crumbling or potentially very afraid, that they keep going. I think any player character has to be someone who will keep going despite adversity and despite being frightened. And I also want to say because they will be frightened. And I wanted to say from a player perspective, that it's probably a good idea to be ready to be a very active participant, because Eureka wants players and characters both to be the drivers of the mystery.
Marvelous. And leaning into the characters, I noticed there's an interesting element where, like you say, you can be playing a mundane human, which could be really interesting in this world, but you do have the option to play sort of a monstrous character, like you mentioned, like a vampire or something supernatural, and that brings in different mechanics into the game. I don't know, Ash or Addison, if you wanted to expand on how those monster characters kind of fit into the game.
We can probably both take this. So playing a monster character in Eureka is not like playing a monster character in any other game. In a game where monster characters are not like really a normal part of it, typically it'll be like a supplement, like, oh, you can play a vampire. That means this character has +1 damage and takes +2 damage from any silver weapon, and that's the entirety of it.
Right, just a little modifier or something, yeah.
Or it'll be something like Vampire the Masquerade, where everybody's vampires, living in vampire world and vampire society, vampire, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But in a Eureka party, if there's a vampire, that vampire is likely to be the only vampire.
Right.
Not just the only vampire in the party, but probably the only vampire they know.
Okay, so it's rare.
Yes, vampire monsters are something incredibly rare that typically do not live in monster societies. There's not a Harry Potter-esque secret world underneath the normal world where monsters all hang out and understand and know each other.
It's not Twilight either, then, no?
Right, it's not Twilight. There's no secret vampire government.
Sure.
A vampire is likely to be the only vampire they know, which means that everyone else they know is a mortal. That means that all their friends are mortals who may or may not know about them being a vampire. And that by itself leads to a just very different dynamic than your average game that features vampire playable characters. There's 4 other monsters, but I won't spend too much time getting into them. They're all very unique because playing a monster in Eureka is a unique experience even within Eureka. Monsters play by different rules. They have weaknesses that they must abide by. Of course, mundane humans have weaknesses, and it's bullets and knives.
Sure, yeah.
Vampires are not as concerned with bullets and knives, although combat is still very deadly for them. They can be taken down in just a few extra bullets, more bullets than a human, but not like they're not invincible. The difference is that they'll come back to life later if they die, quote unquote, whereas a mundane character will not. So they don't have to be as concerned about bullets and knives, but they are quite concerned about sunlight and running water and religious iconography and many other classic vampire weaknesses that they and therefore the player will have to contend with and work around. A common vampire problem is going to be, how is this investigator going to get into a house without an invitation? They have to get an invitation, which means that either they have to stay outside and the rest of the party is like stuck without their strongest fighter, or they have to figure out some way that they are going to get invited in, which is itself a challenge. That is a very fun part of the game. And how are they going to do that without alerting the rest of the party that they are a vampire? Because the rest of the party won't know either, most likely. So they have to contend with weaknesses, like supernatural weaknesses that make their challenges different from the mundane characters' challenges.
Sure.
They also have what we call a true nature, which is a set of rules for what makes them monsters rather than just superhumans or superheroes. And that is, the true nature will outline what do they do that makes them a monster. A vampire obviously has to drink human blood.
Sure, yeah.
And in Eureka, they can't get by on animal blood or anything like that. They got to drink fresh human blood.
No cheat
not
codes.
From bags. Then. Yeah. No ethical loopholes. Eureka will make you confront this. So, composure was mentioned by Ash a little bit ago.
Yeah.
That's a very important stat because stress, fatigue, starvation, all kinds of things can make it go down. And it's not really, it caps the modifiers of stats. So if a character has a +3 in nature or anything like that, but they only have 1 point of composure remaining, they have a +1 in anything they do. A skill cannot be higher than their current composure.
Okay.
Yeah, to put it in a nutshell, it's the stat that makes them human and fallible and like able to crumble under pressure.
Yes.
Right.
And so the Ash, maybe I'm stalling out a bit. Ash, you take what the talk about like monsters and composure and hunting and stuff.
Sure. Did you have something to ask, Jessica? Sorry, I might have interrupted you earlier.
No worries. Well, I tell you what, we've had a bit about those different monsters versus humans as characters that can be played in the game by the players. But that kind of composure led us into combat mechanics a bit. So I don't know if you could speak about kind of what combat is like in the game.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So combat has a lot of rules. It's a big portion of the book. It is going to be cut down, as we talked about it being a toolbox. We wanted it to be... So, okay, let me start from the top. Combat in Eureka is going to be very often an extremely deadly and explosive event. If it happens, it is either because the investigators have made a mistake or because they have gathered all of their tools and are getting the drop on an opponent. Okay. And in either case, the result of it should be explosive, exciting, climactic, part of the story, not a separation from it. It's mechanically dense because if it's going to be deadly, if it's going to be something worth avoiding, it also has to be mechanically deep. Otherwise, it is not. It either feels cheap or it feels unsatisfying.
Sure.
But just like in the real world, if a person gets shot by a bullet, that is probably a disabling event for them. They are probably down and out if they get shot. Having the initiative and like proper planning and getting the drop on people, just like in real life, is going to be the most important thing in Eureka. It's the most important deciding factor. Also, having a gun is a huge advantage. Again, just like in real life. Makes sense, yeah. So we have a lot of rules dedicated to what is in many cases a failure state or the climax of an adventure, to ensure that when it happens, it is satisfying and that it makes sense. Either because it is something very dangerous that the investigators have gotten themselves into, or because it's the payoff to a lot of planning and a lot of work put in.
Fabulous. So we've mentioned a few times, so you recently did your crowdfunding campaign on Kickstarter. So congratulations on that, because that fully funded. And so it's that just last month at the time of recording. So congratulations on the funding for that. I was wondering where the game is at, and if people missed the Kickstarter, how can they get involved? If any of this has seemed interesting and they want to pick up a copy of the game, how can they do that?
So yeah, if you miss the Kickstarter, we don't have any late backing, but we do have a Patreon.
Okay.
We also just have a free demo. We have you can get the May 10th build of the game, which is a complete and fully playable version of the game.
Okay.
It just hasn't been edited and doesn't have any stretch goals and barely has any art.
Okay.
If you want a more updated, and at the time this episode releases, there will have been at least one more big update to the game, which is released through our Patreon. We release like monthly beta updates on the Patreon, and I think that at the time there's going to be even more at the time of at the time that this episode releases. But right now, if I look at the changelog real quick, there's something that's been added since the May 10th version is a new write-in skill for forging documents and evidence, a whole foreword, although I think that is in the demo, that explains a lot of the themes of Eureka. I added a chart that explains the percentage chances of partial success and full success for all modifiers. There's new art. One of the monsters has been partially overhauled. The Thing from Beyond, which is like kind of an Eldritch horror monster. Very, very unique and very original. And one kind of a fan favorite.
Nice.
Even though we tend to use vampire as the default monster, I think this is actually everyone's favorite monster of the fan base.
Oh, there we go. So the Patreon would be the best place to go if people wanted to get involved and see about getting more information on it. And of course, there is the free demo for folks that missed the Kickstarter as well.
Yes, if you don't want to pay, the free demo is a fully playable thing. If you do want to pay like $5 a month, the Patreon will get you a better beta version of the game that has been more improved monthly up until final release.
Fab. And then what's the plans for final release? So obviously the Kickstarter just finished, so I'm sure you're all celebrating and sighing a sigh of relief after completing a crowdfunding campaign successfully. But what's the sort of production timeline? So if people wanted to pick up a physical book at some point?
Well, we set kind of semi-arbitrarily, I will admit, we set a kind of release date or delivery date for the Kickstarter, like January 2025.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I think we can get, of course, like we got a lot of, we ended up getting quite a few stretch goals in our Kickstarter, which is going to add time to the production process. I think we can make it with at least most of what we're going to do to actually release in January of 2025. I think we can probably get the rule book out. It might take a little bit longer to fully finish the adventure modules, and get the physical copy stuff ready. That might take a little longer, but we are doing print on demand physical copies.
Okay, great.
Through RPG. That's the plan.
Yeah.
And people that back the Kickstarter, they're going to get the ability to get one of those like at cost, which is a lot cheaper.
Yeah. Mm-hmm, of course.
Of course, we don't have the resources to handle all the printing ourselves.
Okay, sure. But it will be available on DriveThruRPG for general release at some point in 2025. Fair to say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Marvelous.
I'd say that's fair. I can't see us being any more than maybe 6 months behind on all the deliverables.
Marvelous. Well, that's great to hear. thank you so much to all three of you for coming on to talk about Eureka.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's links in the show notes if anyone wants to find out more, because we have limited time here. I'm already taking up so much of your time kindly. But one final question I have, which I ask all guests, is do you have any recommendations for any other TTRPGs? And the rules are it can't be a game that you've made, because we've spent just under an hour talking about Eureka. And of course, it can't be D&D because we're not D&D. So Blue, I might start with you if that's okay. Do you have any other games you'd like to shout out?
Sure, yeah. One game that I've read the rules of recently is Mothership.
Mm-hmm.
So
Love that.
it's on its second edition right now. It's a horror sci-fi RPG that's kind of Alien, The Thing, Dead Space vibes. It's got really simple rules with a D100 system, really fun mechanic where the characters press in pieces, and each critical failure prompts a roll that's got to be more than your stress number, so it increases in difficulty, and it's actually like super deadly. Like it has real consequences. And it also has like Eureka has really good tools for GMs. It also has really good tools for GMs.
Perfect. I love that recommendation. Ash, what about you?
So one of the games that I spent a lot of time playing is Burning Wheel by Luke Crane. Not sure if you've heard of it.
I haven't played it, no.
Gotcha. It's also used in Mouse Guard, Torchbearer. It's the basis of the rules for those games as well. Burning Wheel is a very interesting system. It's extremely medieval and extremely Tolkienian fantasy. It may not be to everyone's taste. It's a really dense game. I think if you're looking into designing games, it's a really good one to look into because it has. It was the forerunner on a lot of extremely interesting concepts that I have rarely seen elsewhere. Defining a character's beliefs and instincts, going through like life path character generation, similar to Traveler, if you're familiar. Just a game which I think is worth looking into because it is so unique.
I love that. It's a great recommendation. And Addison, what about you?
I was actually gonna do Mothership.
We can have two votes for Mothership.
Shout out to Tyler from the Mothership team. He actually, when Anim was getting off the ground as a company, he gave us a lot of helped us like design our website and stuff.
Nice.
He's great. He's been very helpful. So if not Mothership, something that we're playing in our tabletop RPG book club right now is a game called Fist. All caps. It is the quickest, fastest way to describe it would be kind of like a Metal Gear Solid RPG.
Okay.
The party members, the PCs, are going to be they may or may not be superhuman. It's similar to Eureka. You could have very mundane characters next to superhuman characters in a party. It's a much simpler and more rules-like game than Eureka, but it is about spies / secret agents / special forces in a Cold War, in like an alternate history Cold War with superpowers. And so the party will undertake like secret missions in a Cold War background. And one of them may be a grizzled veteran soldier, more like Snake from Metal Gear Solid, just a normal guy who's very well trained. And then his partner might be a guy who can control bees with his mind, or who can fly, or has like psychic telepathy or something.
I love that. Who doesn't want to play a character that can control bees with their minds?
Yeah,
some great recommendations.
And of course,
there.
Metal Gear Solid is quite similar to that situation, or that type of story.
Sure. And this TTRPG book club you have, of course, where does that take place if other people are interested in joining in?
It is a Discord server, and I guess we can give you an invite link to stick in the show notes.
Yeah, that'd be great.
As soon as we're done recording.
Sounds good. I'll post that now.
It is a Discord server. It does not have a weekly or a monthly structure. It's just whenever we finish this game, we start a new one. We nominate. We have a nomination period. People nominate a game. We have a voting period. Everyone votes on what game they'd like to play, and then whichever game wins, the whole server plays it. And we also we read the rule book. That's a very important part. You got to read the rule book to play RPGs. And we discuss the rule book as if it's like a book club, like as if we're reading a book with a book club. Yeah. Read the rule book, discuss, play the game, discuss, then nominate and vote again. Nice. It's actually a really nice system we come up with because it's not very schedule intensive. We sort people into play groups based on compatible schedules. And we have, I think in FIST right now, we have 8 different groups with 8 different game masters and 8 different sets of players grouped together based on compatible schedule. Sometimes 3 or 4 people out of 150 will not be able to make it because their schedule doesn't match up with any game master that we have. Cool. We assign, so that's unfortunate. But the fact that there's only 4 and not 80 means that we're doing a pretty good job of making it fit with the schedule of the members of the server.
Great, and I'll put the Discord link in the show notes there so people can check that out and join if you'd like to also join it.
Is that a permanent link? Just making sure.
It's a 7 days link. I don't know how to get a permanent one.
Oh, I can get let me get a permanent link.
We'll put the permanent link in the show notes so people can have a look in there. I'm very conscious of time, so I'm going to let the 3 of you go. But thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing Eureka with us. So Ash, Blue, Addison, thank you so much for coming on the show. To everyone who watched live or listened, thank you very much for coming along. And we'll be back next week with another Indie Tabletop RPG to share with you. So thanks very much. But for now, that's all. Bye.
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 Bye.